The Saturday evening light, a soft autumnal gold, filtered through the large windows of Eleanor Vance's small Lynn's apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was a peaceful scene that did nothing to soothe the frantic thumping of her heart. Spread across her drafting table were the blueprints for the new Blackwood Corporate Tower extension, a project she was a very small, very replaceable cog in. For the past 2 weeks, she had been working 14-hour days, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the quiet desperation of a single mother trying to prove her worth. Her 7-year-old son, Leo, sat quietly on the worn rug, his small shoulders slumped. He was supposed to be at his friend's house, but he had refused to go, his usual ebullient energy replaced by a deep, weary sadness that tore at Eleanor's soul. In his hands, he clutched a framed photograph, the last one ever taken of the three of them, before his father, David, had decided that the responsibilities of family were a cage he needed to escape. "Mom," Leo's voice was a small, fragile thing. "Do you think Dad will ever visit?" Eleanor's hand stilled over the blueprints. She took a deep breath, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Of course, sweetie. He's just very busy." But they both knew the truth. David's version of busy had lasted for 2 years, a silence broken only by the occasional, guilt-tinged birthday card. Leo's gaze dropped back to the photograph. While Eleanor's back was turned, wrestling with a particularly complex structural detail, he saw her phone lying on the edge of the sofa. He picked it up, his small fingers navigating the screen with the ease of his generation. He went to his mother's recent calls, looking for the contact simply labeled Dad. It wasn't there. But near the top was a name he recognized from hearing his mom on work calls. A. Blackwood. To his 7-year-old mind, the formal name looked important, official. Maybe this Mr. Blackwood would know how to reach his dad. With the simple, heartbreaking logic of a lonely child, he opened a new message. His thumb moved slowly, carefully, typing out the 5 words that were the constant prayer in his heart. "Daddy, come home." He hit send. Miles away, in a grand ballroom overlooking the Danube, Alistair Blackwood stood beside his fiancée, Isabel Lauron, the very picture of corporate royalty. The pre-wedding gala was a nauseating spectacle of wealth and influence, an event orchestrated by Isabel's family to merge their old money dynasty with his new money empire. Alistair felt a familiar sense of detachment, a man watching a play of his own life from a great distance. Isabel was perfect, beautiful, and socially brilliant. Theirs was a strategic alliance, a logical conclusion to his solitary life. She would be a perfect corporate wife. He had convinced himself that this sterile, predictable partnership was all he wanted, all he deserved. His personal phone, a device reserved for a handful of contacts, vibrated in his pocket. He excused himself from a conversation with the Austrian Minister of Finance, stepping onto a private balcony. He expected a message from his security chief or his chief counsel. Instead, he saw the text from an employee number he didn't recognize. Eleanor Vance. And then he saw the message. "Daddy, come home." The world tilted on its axis. The polite chatter of the gala, the clinking of champagne glasses, the soft strains of the string quartet. It all faded into a deafening roar in his ears. The 5 simple words were a key, unlocking a vault of pain he had kept sealed for a decade. He was no longer on a balcony in Linz. He was in a hospital room, holding the tiny, cold hand of his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, her breathing shallow, her life slipping away from him. He had been on a business trip in Hong Kong, closing the biggest deal of his career, when she had suddenly fallen ill. He had promised her he'd be home soon. "Come home, Daddy," she had whispered over the phone, her voice weak. He had caught the first flight, but it was too late. He had walked into the hospital room to a silence that had haunted him ever since. He had failed her. He had chosen work over his daughter, and she was gone. The text message on his screen was a ghost, a cruel echo of his greatest failure. He stumbled back against the railing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Isabel appeared at the doorway, her smile tightening with annoyance when she saw his face. "Alistair, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. The mayor is asking for you." He looked at her perfect, beautiful face, and saw nothing. He saw their future, a lifetime of galas, of polite conversations, of a cold, empty partnership. A life without love, without heart, a life where a child's plea to their father was just an inconvenience. And in that moment, Something inside him snapped. The grief he had suppressed for 10 years erupted, not as sadness, but as a fierce, desperate clarity. He could not save his own child, but the universe had just sent him the cry of another. "The wedding is off," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. Isabel stared at him, her smile frozen. "What did you say?" "Don't be absurd, Alistair. You're just stressed." "I said," he repeated, his voice gaining a terrifying strength, "the wedding is off. I can't do this. I can't marry you." He pushed past her, his eyes fixed on some distant point she couldn't see. He strode through the ballroom, a man on fire, ignoring the confused calls of his name. He was no longer the detached CEO. He was a father who had been given a second chance to answer a child's call. He didn't know who Eleanor Vance was, or why her child had texted him. He only knew one thing with an unshakable certainty. This time, he was going home. The fury that propelled Alistair from the gala cooled into a cold, hard resolve as his driver navigated the late-night streets of Linz. He had left a maelstrom in his wake, a humiliated fiancée, two powerful families in disarray, and a scandal that would be front-page news by morning. None of it mattered. All that mattered were the 5 words burning a hole in his mind. He had his security team pull Eleanor Vance's employee file. Junior architect, single mother, stellar performance reviews, address in a modest working-class neighborhood on the other side of the city. He directed his driver, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows of his Maybach. He was moving on pure, raw instinct, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to trust in a decade. Back in her apartment, Eleanor had just discovered the message. Her blood ran cold as she saw the text sent from her phone to her boss, the formidable Alistair Blackwood. Mortification warred with terror. She would be fired. How could she explain this? That her lonely son had mistaken the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation for his absentee father? She was frantically trying to type an apology, a retraction, anything, when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed on her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was late, almost 10 o'clock. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peered through the peephole, and her world tilted. Alistair Blackwood stood on her doorstep, his tuxedo immaculate, his face a mask of grim intensity. She swung the door open, her mind blank with shock. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry," she stammered. "My son, he took my phone. I can explain." Alistair held up a hand, silencing her. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, into the small, clean but clearly struggling apartment. His gaze landed on Leo, who had come to see who was at the door and was now hiding shyly behind his mother's legs. "It's you," Alistair said, his voice a low, rough whisper. He was speaking to Leo. "You're the one who sent the text." Leo peeked out from behind Eleanor. "Are you my daddy's friend? Can you tell him to come home?" The innocent question was a knife in Alistair's heart. He knelt, an instinctive gesture that was completely out of character for the man who never showed weakness. He was now at eye level with the small boy. "My name is Alistair," he said, his voice softer than Eleanor had ever heard it. "And I got your message." That was a very brave thing to do, telling someone you need your dad. Eleanor stared, baffled. This was not the reaction she had expected. She had prepared for anger, for a cold dismissal, for the immediate termination of her employment. She had not prepared for this strange, gentle sorrow that seemed to radiate from her powerful boss. "Mr. Blackwood," she tried again, "I can't apologize enough. He's just a little boy. He misses his father. He didn't understand, but I do," Alistair said, his intense gaze finally rising to meet hers. And in his eyes, she saw not the anger of a CEO, but the profound, bottomless grief of a fellow parent. "I understand completely." He stood up, the moment of vulnerability passing as his usual air of command settled back over him, though it was now tempered by something else, something she couldn't name. "The reason I am here, Ms. Vance," he said, his tone shifting, "is to discuss the message, not as your boss, but as someone who understands its importance." He looked around her small living room, at the worn-out sofa and the stack of bills on the corner table. "It's clear to me that your son needs his father. And it's also clear that you are in a situation that is untenable." Eleanor's pride flared. "My situation is my own, Mr. Blackwood. I handle it." "I have no doubt that you do," he said, and she was surprised by the genuine respect in his voice. "But you shouldn't have to. Not alone." He paused, and she could almost see the gears turning in his brilliant mind, assessing, analyzing, problem-solving. There is a new project my company is launching, a community development initiative. We're designing a state-of-the-art family center. It requires a lead architect with a deep, personal understanding of what families, especially single-parent families, truly need. Her heart began to pound. She was a junior architect. She was years away from a position like that. "I want you to head the project," he said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. Starting Monday. The offer was so outlandish, so far beyond the realm of possibility, that she could only stare at him. This had to be a dream. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Alistair looked back at Leo, who was now watching him with wide, curious eyes. "Because a boy asked his father to come home," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she didn't yet understand. "And I have to believe that some prayers deserve to be answered." He was not just offering her a job. He was offering her a lifeline. And as he stood in her humble apartment, having just blown up his own life for a reason she couldn't yet fathom, Eleanor had the distinct feeling that he was desperately searching for a lifeline of his own. The weekend passed in a surreal haze for Eleanor. On Saturday morning, a sleek black car arrived at her apartment. A courier delivered a tablet computer and a contract for her new position as lead architect on the Blackwood Family Center project. The salary listed was more than triple her current pay, a number so staggering it made her feel dizzy. Included was a relocation package to a company-owned apartment in a new, family-friendly district of Linz, available immediately. It was all too much, too fast. Her mind screamed that it was a trick, a form of charity so extravagant it was insulting. But her heart, the weary heart of a mother who counted every euro, knew it was an opportunity she could not refuse for Leo's sake. On Monday, she walked into the towering headquarters of Blackwood Holdings not as a junior employee, but as a project lead. The news of her promotion had spread like wildfire, along with the scandalous gossip about Alistair's canceled wedding. Her new office was a corner suite with a view of the Postlingberg Basilica, a space usually reserved for senior partners. It was clear that Alistair had personally overseen every detail. He had even had a small table and a set of art supplies placed in a corner. For Leo, he had explained when he gave her the tour, his tone carefully professional. For when he visits after school. Their first project meeting was a tense affair. The other architects and engineers, all men who had been with the company for decades, looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. She was an unknown, a 20-something single mother who had been inexplicably catapulted into a position of power. But Alistair was a formidable ally. He started the meeting by publicly stating his complete confidence in her vision and her ability to lead. He made it clear that her authority was absolute, and that he expected everyone to give her their full support. He didn't just give her a title, he gave her the power to succeed. As they began to work together, a new dynamic formed between them. In the office, he was Mr. Blackwood, the demanding, precise CEO. He challenged her ideas, pushed her to be better, to think bigger. But outside the sterile confines of the boardroom, he was Alistair, a man who seemed to be slowly, cautiously, coming back to life. He would often find a reason to call her after hours, using the project as an excuse to ask how Leo was doing. He started to share small pieces of himself, talking about his daughter, Lily, and her love for drawing. He never spoke directly about her death, but Eleanor could feel the weight of his grief in every story he told. One evening, she was working late, trying to solve a design flaw in the plans for the center's daycare. Alistair appeared in her doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're working too hard," he said, placing a cup on her desk. "I learned from the best," she countered with a small smile. He looked at the blueprints, his brow furrowed. "What's the problem?" She explained the issue with the natural light in the infant nap room. He listened intently, then pointed to a section of the plan. "What if you move the non-load-bearing wall here and replace this section of the roof with reinforced skylights?" It was a brilliant, simple solution she had completely overlooked. "That's perfect," she said, looking at him with newfound respect for his intellect. "I was an architect, you know," he said quietly, as if confessing a secret. "Before I took over the family business. It was what I loved." In that moment, she saw him not as a billionaire CEO, but as a man who had given up his own dreams for the sake of duty, a man who understood the language of blueprints and beams as well as he understood balance sheets. This shared passion became a bridge between them. Their late-night work sessions became more frequent, filled with intense design debates and quiet, personal conversations. He was drawn to her creativity and her fierce dedication. She was captivated by his hidden depths and the surprising gentleness he showed whenever he spoke of Leo. He started to join her for lunch, and sometimes he would bring Leo a small gift, a book on architecture for children, a model of a famous bridge. He was becoming a quiet but constant presence in their lives, a stable figure that Leo was beginning to look forward to seeing. The ex-fiancée, Isabel, did not disappear quietly. She launched a campaign against him in the society pages, painting him as a cold, unstable man and Eleanor as a manipulative homewrecker. One afternoon, Isabel showed up at the office, demanding to see Alistair. Finding him in a meeting, she cornered Eleanor in the hallway. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Isabel hissed, her voice a low, venomous threat. "But it's over. Alistair will come to his senses. He always chooses logic over messy emotions. You and your brat are nothing but a temporary distraction." Before Eleanor could respond, Alistair's voice cut through the air, cold as steel. "Get out." He had stepped out of his meeting, his face a mask of thunderous rage. "Don't you ever speak to her, or about her son, like that again. The only mistake I made was not ending our engagement sooner. Now, get out of my building." He stood there, a protective shield between Eleanor and the woman who represented his past. And as Isabel scurried away, Eleanor knew that what was growing between them was more than just a working relationship. It was a bond forged in a shared understanding of pain and the quiet, hopeful promise of a second chance. The public confrontation with Isabel was a turning point. It solidified Alistair's choice and severed the final tie to his old life. The gossip columns went wild for a week, but Alistair weathered the storm with a stoicism that impressed Eleanor. He seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His focus shifted almost entirely to the Family Center project and, increasingly, to Eleanor and Leo. He began to invite them out on weekends, framing the outings as research for the project. They visited parks, playgrounds, and family-friendly museums across Upper Austria. He would watch Leo interact with the spaces, taking notes on his tablet, but Eleanor knew it was more than that. He was learning how to be part of a family again. He was awkward at first, unsure of the rhythm of life with a child. But he was a quick study. He learned that Leo loved the Ars Electronica Center, but was scared of the dark exhibits. He learned that Leo would only eat his schnitzel if it was cut into dinosaur shapes. And he learned that the best way to end a long day was with ice cream by the Danube. During one of these outings, at the Linz Zoo, Leo, who had grown comfortable and affectionate with Alistair, grabbed his hand. It was a simple, trusting gesture, but it made Alistair freeze. Eleanor watched as a wave of emotion washed over his face. He looked down at the small hand in his, and then up at her, his eyes filled with a decade of unshed tears. "Lily used to do that," he whispered, his voice thick. She would slip her hand into mine, just like that. It was the first time he had spoken of his daughter with such raw, immediate pain in front of her. Without thinking, Eleanor reached out and placed her hand over his and Leo's, her warmth a silent offering of comfort. In that moment, they were not a CEO and his employee. They were three people standing in the sunlight, bound by a shared, unspoken grief and the fragile hope of a new beginning. Their relationship deepened into a quiet, comfortable intimacy. He started coming to her new apartment for dinner, and he would stay to help her put Leo to bed, reading him stories with a gentle patience that still surprised her. He was seeing a therapist, something he admitted to her one evening with a shame that she quickly dispelled. "There is no shame in seeking help to heal, Alistair," she told him. "It's the bravest thing you can do." He was doing the work. He was facing the demons he had run from for so long. And the more he healed, the more he opened his heart to her and Leo. The project was nearing its final design phase, and they were working late in his office, the city lights twinkling below. They had solved a complex zoning issue, and the mood was light, celebratory. "We make a good team," he said, looking at her across the vast desk. "Yes, we do," she agreed, her heart fluttering. He stood and walked over to her side of the desk, leaning against it. The space between them felt charged, alive with all the things they had left unsaid. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and serious. When I received that text from Leo, I felt like the universe was holding up a mirror, showing me the man I had become, a coward who ran from love, who ran from fatherhood. I walked out of that gala determined to become a man my daughter would have been proud of. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing her jawline. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about my past. It stopped being about atonement. And it started being about my future. About you. Her breath caught in her throat. Alistair, I'm in love with you, Ellie, he said, using her nickname for the first time. I love your strength, your compassion, your brilliant mind. I love the way you see the world. And I love the way you've brought light back into my life and into my heart. He leaned in, his gaze searching hers. I know the way this started was unconventional, but what I feel for you is the most real, the most honest thing in my life. And I have to know, is there a chance you could feel the same way? She had been falling in love with him for months, in the quiet moments, in the shared glances over blueprints, in the way his face lit up when Leo laughed. She had been too afraid to admit it, too scared of the chasm between their worlds. But looking at him now, at the vulnerable, hopeful man who had torn down his own walls to reach her, she knew there was no chasm, only a bridge they had built together. Yes, she whispered, her voice filled with all the love she had kept locked away. I'm already there. The kiss was not one of desperate relief, but of joyful certainty. It was a promise of a new foundation, a new design, a future they would build together, not as a CEO and his employee, but as partners, as a family. A year later, the Blackwood Family Center opened its doors. It was a masterpiece of light and space, a building that was both beautiful and functional, a testament to Eleanor's vision and Alistair's dedication. The opening ceremony was a major city event, attended by the mayor and broadcast on local news. But Alistair and Eleanor weren't on the stage. They were in the crowd, watching as children poured into the new playground. Leo, now 8 years old and beaming with pride, was showing a group of new friends the climbing wall he had helped design. Isabel Lauron was ancient history, a footnote in a society column. David, Leo's biological father, had made a brief, half-hearted attempt to reconnect after seeing news of Eleanor's success, but his request for money had been met with a polite but firm refusal from a lawyer. He had disappeared again, a ghost they no longer needed to fear. Alistair wrapped his arm around Eleanor's shoulders, pulling her close. He was no longer the haunted man she had met a year ago. He was relaxed, happy, his eyes clear and full of life. He looks happy, Alistair said, nodding toward Leo. We all are, Eleanor replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. Later that day, as the sun began to set, the three of them were walking home through the Hauptplatz, the heart of Linz. Leo was skipping ahead, chasing pigeons. Mom, he called out, running back to them. Can we get ice cream? Of course, Alistair said, swinging him up onto his shoulders. Leo let out a squeal of delight. As they walked, Leo leaned down, his small arms wrapped around Alistair's head. I'm glad you came home, he whispered, a simple, profound statement of fact. Alistair's step faltered. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes shining with an emotion so deep it needed no words. He had received a text a year ago, a mistaken prayer from a child he didn't know. He had answered the call, and in doing so, he hadn't just saved a struggling family. He had saved himself. He had finally, after a decade of running, found his way home.